Now, I find if you want to get into a little bit of a debate around a campfire, discuss about tyres. And of course, the subset of that is tyre pressures. And luckily, we have Steve Burke from ToyoTires to tell you all about tyre pressures tonight. So I'd like everyone to bring a warm welcome to Steve.
Thank you for that excellent intro, Simon. Look, what we're going to do tonight, we're going to cover a couple of things. Pressures is one. We did talk about that last time. We're also going to talk about tyre choice, and we're going to get a bit specific and a bit tech, which is good. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about tyre choice and whether a 2 or a 3-ply tyre is what you want and or need. So let's have a talk about that. Then we're going to cover quickly a new product that we released earlier this year. And we've got, look, pressures are ultra important, and we're going to talk about those as well. And I had a conversation with a club member yesterday, and it was quite in depth, which is great. So a lot of what he asked about, he was very tech too. So he's going to be involved in what we're going to talk about. So we'll use both of those things. So let's first talk about tyre choice in some specific terms. So now, why I usually start with a lot of talks when we talk about tyre choice. And look, most club four drivers are a bit better. A lot of people choose the tyre they want rather than the one they need. Okay, so a lot of people go out and buy the biggest, toughest looking tyre because they look great, but they need to ask themselves, is that what I need? Okay, and that really relates to what you're going to do with that tyre, what you plan to do with that tyre. And one of the major parts of the tyre is the basic construction, which is the carcass, okay? With an SUV tyre, there's two types, basically. Regardless of what brand, it's either going to be a 2-ply or a 3-ply, okay? So on the surface, that looks like there's not a lot of difference, but you'll find in the market that the difference between a 2 and 3-ply is quite big, okay, in performance and what they do. We're going to talk about that in some detail. Now, most four-wheel drivers assume that the heavy-duty option is always going to be the best, okay? And obviously, you probably already know I'm going to tell you that's not always the case. And we'll talk about why, okay? Sometimes what we call, look, light duty is probably not the best term, but it is lighter duty than the 3-ply tyre, if you like, okay? So there's a lot of times when the lighter tyre is definitely better, but there's times when this one is as well. So let's think about it. So look, again, most users tend to go for the heavy-duty option. But yeah, again, the choice is really important. And the cost, this is going to affect your tyre cost as well. So, and we'll talk about that as we go as well. Okay, so we'll look at the 3-ply tyre first and its advantages. So the 3-ply tyre is a more heavy-duty one. Now, what are the advantages of that 3-ply, that more heavy-duty construction in real terms? Minimise sidewall damage, and that's mainly due to this, less sidewall deflection. So we have a stiffer sidewall. Okay, so at the same pressures compared to a 2-ply tyre, we're not getting as much deflection, as much bagging, if you like. So we have a lot less sidewall exposed, okay? That's the biggest one, probably the biggest advantage. Some others, sharper steering response, that's a nice to have. Now, most manufacturers on their 3-ply tyres will have larger side bodies because then we're starting to look at the mud or the hybrid type tyres. So they tend to have a bigger side body, which again gives you that some more sidewall protection. The other one, which was interesting, I did this a few years ago, and in doing it, I didn't quite click, but one of the guys who worked with me said, well, Steve, one really important point is less sidewall deflection. That means we have more ground clearance. Okay, a bit of a holy grail for the four-wheel drivers, okay? We do a lot of mods to improve ground clearance to make it easy to get over obstacles, yeah? Okay, so one big advantage of having less sidewall deflection is we have more ride height, okay? So, yeah, improved ground clearance. So what I've done here, a lot of numbers here, but the basic idea is we have quite considerable amount of, look at even at 20 PSI. So as we get lower, we get a bigger difference, okay? But 12 PSI is really very low. We're only going to be using their sort of sand pressures on a light vehicle with a big tyre, okay? 20 PSI or even 25, we're still looking at near on 15 millimetres difference between a 2 and a 3-ply tyre, just looking at the Toyotas, okay? That's considerable, okay, just by getting a tyre. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so there were obviously, sorry, before I move on, yeah, numbers we did using a specific vehicle and tyre size, doing some measurements. Okay. The disadvantages, okay. And these you've got to consider, okay, because you've got to, whenever you're purchasing a tyre and you're choosing, there's always going to be a positive and negative, okay? If you want those positives, you've got to live with the negatives and you've got to be okay with them, okay? With the 3-ply tyre, one big one off-road is we need a greater pressure change to change our footprint size, okay? Stiffer sidewall means we need to let more out to get that same sort of footprint tyre as we do a 2-ply tyre, which has more flexibility. Disadvantages, most of these relate to the fact that a 3-ply tyre is going to be heavier, okay? More material, heavier tyre, okay? And the first one is increased fuel consumption, okay? Heavier tyre, more energy to move and stop. Look, I suppose a lot of these things are things that 4 drivers wouldn't think about, okay? Slower damper response, okay? A heavier tyre means our dampers or shock absorbers have to work harder, okay? Increased ride harshness, that's pretty simple. We've got less sidewall deflection. That's really easy to understand. Reduce heat resistance. Now, if we're thinking of tyres in terms of being a heat sink, a thicker, heavier tyre holds more heat, okay? It doesn't dissipate as well as a thinner one. Reduce braking performance. Again, this really relates to a heavier tyre, okay? You put a heavier wheel or tyre or a taller one, you're going to notice increased braking distances with the same sort of pressures. Okay, so they are the disadvantages. So, and most of these, again, really relate to, well, ride harshness is a feeling thing, but the rest, a lot of it relates to on-road performance. Although, again, slower damper response is really only going to be an issue on the faster dirt road stuff. Okay, 2-ply tyre, the lighter option here. Now, the most obvious advantage comparing the 2 with the 3 is the 2-ply tyre is going to have a better footprint change when we're airing down. They're going to be better on sand at the lower pressures. We're going to get a much bigger footprint change, okay? They ride nicer, less fuel consumption, reduced ride harshness, and improved braking performance, comparing that to a 3-ply heavier tyre, okay? The disadvantages are pretty much the opposite as a 3-ply. So increased chance of sidewall damage because we've got more sidewall deflection, reduced ground clearance, and a slightly slower steering response, which is more of a feel thing, but these two are really the bigger disadvantages. Okay, so probably the end, what should I buy? What should I look at when I'm buying, okay? And that really should relate to the type of off-roading you're doing, okay? If you're doing occasional off-road and you're not being very adventurous with your off-road and you're doing a lot of road work, the 2-ply tyre, all things considered, is definitely a better option. Now, also keep in mind, a 2-ply tyre is generally going to be a lower purchase price because they're usually your AT style tyres. You add that to your increase in fuel consumption you get with a 3-ply tyre, they are a much lower price option over the life of the tyre. But if you're a serious off-roader and you need that high level of puncture resistance, yeah, 3-ply tyre is probably your best option if you would need that reliability off-road. Okay. All right, so our lineup for this year has changed and we've introduced a brand new product called, well, we now have 2 versions of the Open Country RT, okay? They look pretty much the same pattern, but they are very different. And I'm here to tell you a bit about why they are different and why it's an option some should consider. So just for your information too, so the Open Country AT3 range will pretty much replace all the AT2s by mid-year, okay? There's only a couple of sizes left in the AT2. The MT, yep, that will continue to be available as our most aggressive, most heavy-duty option in the Toyo range for serious off-roaders. Now, let's talk a little bit about, so the big difference, as we can see from the 2 flags here, the new version of the RT is a Japanese-made tyre, okay? And although it looks similar or almost the same as the American-made one, The only thing they really have in common is a tread pattern. Otherwise, they are totally different products. So let's talk about them. So look, the RT ex-USA has been very successful for us. It fits between your traditional all-terrain and a mud tyre. It's virtually a mud tyre construction-wise. Heavy-duty 3-ply tyre, very deep tread depth. So very much designed for the serious off-roader who wanted something similar to a mud tyre but with a little bit nicer performance on-road. Now, what we saw in the market was, and it's a growing market all the time, a spot between your traditional AT and the RT, okay? Somebody who wanted something a little bit more aggressive than the AT3 or even the old AT2, but not that full 3-ply ultra heavy duty tyre like the RT. And that's what we have with the open country RT Japanese produced tyre. So same tread pattern, but quite different. It's really designed for occasional off-roaders. 2-ply tyre, okay, compared to 3-ply with the American tyre. That's probably the biggest difference construction-wise. So much nicer on-road compared to the American tyre. There's been no surprise to or no secret that sourcing the American RT has been an issue for some time. The Japanese version, supply-wise, is much better as well. Also, the size range is different. So this is the Japanese tyre size range is really aimed more at OE replacement sizes with a couple of aftermarket sizes as well. So it's really aimed at the occasional off-roader who hasn't got a big lifted, heavily modified vehicle. Light mods or standard vehicles really designed for those sort of vehicles, okay? Serious off-roaders, yeah, we still have the American RT and the MT for those who want that full 3-ply ultra heavy duty construction. Okay, so, yep, size range. So small size range, and the ones in yellow are really the high demand ones. So just to give you an idea, the top 2 sizes here, they are the 2 best-selling all-terrain sizes in Australia, in the Australian market. So we have those. They are LT, so they're light truck, but 8-ply rather than 10-ply. Okay, so the American RTs are 10-ply. These are 8. Not quite as heavy duty. Some other really popular sizes, 265 77, 285 77, also a popular aftermarket size. 285 60 18, that is a straight passenger construction replacement for your 200 series, okay, in 18s. A couple of other rod board sizes, but the ones in yellow are really the main size we expect to sell quite a few of. So in summary, if you're looking at all-terrain tyres and you want something that little bit more aggressive, without giving away too much on-road performance, this is a really good option. So I've run a set for 8,000 Ks now. I don't do off-road, okay? What surprised me about them is 2 things. The ride, it's very similar to the AT3, okay? The on-road performance, considering how aggressive the pattern is. It's very similar to the AT3. The noise level is slightly higher. You'd expect that from a more aggressive pattern. One thing you would expect, but compared to your AT3, is better off-road traction. That really much more open tread design on the shoulders is going to give you that advantage off-road compared to your standard AT3. Okay, all right, something new. All righty, pressures. Okay, so I'll get his name. It was Greg West. He rang me yesterday. He said he's in hospital at the moment. Hope he's feeling a little better. He had a lot of detailed questions that relate to pressures, okay? He'd been checking his pressures and confirming whether they were good or not using 2 methods, using his tyre pressure monitoring system, so checking the difference between his cold and hot pressures, which is really good. And he's also got an infrared gun too, so to check the tyre temps, okay? So he had a lot of questions about what to check, how much. So his questions were, what tyre pressures? Now, should he be using? Now, this is where I come to this slide. So, and this applies to everyone. So when people ring me up about tyre pressures, and now especially with modified four-wheel drives, now when we go to most clubs, most people have modified four-wheel drives, okay? Standard vehicles, it's a little bit easier to work out pressures because you can work off the tare weight and add a bit. But when we look at modified four-wheel drives, I highly recommend you actually get them weighed, okay? Then we can be very accurate with pressures. We're not guessing. And I, being a tech guy, and wanting the best result, I hate guessing, okay? Small investment. There's quite a few organisations now that'll come to you and do your weighing. A lot of those are advertising, especially combining your caravan, if you have that too, checking your towable weights and all that as well, which is, for me, highly recommended. So there's two things you can do here. As well as getting those axle weights, so we can be accurate with our pressures, you can also check the legality of vehicles. So Greg asked me about that. Now, legalities and tyres, okay, so the GVM thing and your vehicle weight, that's something you have to look at, okay? I can give you advice on pressures, okay? The actual weights of the vehicles compared to legalities is something you've got to sort, okay? But when somebody rings me and they have axle weights, I'll give them 3 pressures, okay? I'll give them one for highway, one for what we call, and actually Greg was spot on, he said an 80 kilometre an hour average maximum for dirt road work, okay, which is generally lower, obviously, than your highway pressure, and then one for what we call slow speed off-road, so a maximum average of 30 kilometres an hour, okay, and that's for sand and slow speed off-road, okay, and obviously much lower pressure to get our much bigger footprint. Okay, but how do we work it out? As already at the axle weights and the tyre size. If we have those two, we can be very accurate with those recommendations. If we have a vehicle that's near stock, we can work off the tare weight. That works quite well. If we've got a vehicle that we've got a lot of modifications, we can make estimates, but they're estimates, okay? Then we're guessing the split front to rear or estimating. And again, yeah, estimates are obviously not near as good as what we know. And that, I highly recommend, again, making that investment and knowing what your vehicle weighs. Okay. What else? Greg had some very detailed questions also about tyre pressure monitoring systems. Now, I'm a big fan of them. They're great, okay? The big advantage, especially if you're caravan and you've got those tyres all the way back there, if you have a tyre that is deflating, it'll tell you before it's a black gooey mess on the side of the road, okay? So it can save you quite a lot of money like that. And obviously the safety side of not trying to drive with a deflating tyre is obviously a good thing. Look, the big, they all have a temperature reading, but to be frank, regarding tyres, it tells you nothing, okay? That's a sensor on the end of a valve, okay? It's not going to tell you what's happening inside the tyre, okay? What it's going to tell you is how hot that air is running past that sensor, okay? So if you've got a lot of brake temp sometimes, it'll give you a spike, but it's not going to tell you about the tyre. So I wouldn't worry about that temperature. What it does tell you about is the difference between your hot and cold pressures, okay? That is critical, okay? If we've got a big difference, okay, that's telling us the tyres are too hot and we've started with a cold pressure that's too low, okay? But if we've gone through this and we have our pressure recommendations from our manufacturer, you're not going to have issues with that, okay? So I invite all of you who've bought brand name tyres to get their manufacturers to, ring them up and get your recommendations. Now, that's obviously a service we offer. And I know most tyre manufacturers of well-known brands, if you call them up with that information, they'll be able to give you accurate pressure recommendations, okay? Another reason, look, brand name tyres are usually more expensive than non-brand ones, but that's part of your purchase price as well. All right. That's pretty much all I had to cover regarding pressures. But the big one is, one size doesn't fit all. Okay, that's really, really important. If somebody comes up to me, I've got this vehicle, what are the pressures? Without a lot more information, I can't provide anything that's of any use, of any accuracy, So, okay, all right. That's all I've got prepared. Is there any questions tonight? And look, questions are all good. Trust me. Yes.
Just wondering what your formula actually is, given that if we do have their axle weights are, the weight of the car, brand of the tyres, the size of the tyres? What is the formula? Do you have that?
I've got a couple of formulas, yep. And but it's not. The safety margins vary too. Okay, so I've used formula and a safety margin as well. The safety margins vary. Now, some vehicles, I'll pick on a vehicle, and it's not a bad vehicle. Okay, it's just that it has an independent rear end, which means that when we load them up, they get a lot of negative camber. Okay, it's not a Toyota. It's not a bad vehicle, but it's just a nature of that vehicle. So that means that they're a lot more prone to. When a big sign of underinflation is once we start cracking above the B, okay? You're seeing that tyre's overheating and failing because it hasn't got enough pressure for the load. That's the sign. The light truck ones, that's where they'll fail first. So I use a formula, safety margin, yeah. So, yeah. But, yeah, it does vary on the vehicle. But, again, yeah, knowing the axle weights is key to be giving accurate recommendations. Yeah. What? Look, please ask. Look, myself and Dylan are going to, we're not going to hang around for the end tonight. Dylan's got a long way to go. Sorry, but so if you've got any questions, yeah, fire away now, please.
I noticed that you got no 16-inch tyres. A lot of us have Landcruiser 79s. We run 16-inch rims.
In that particular new product, we don't. But in the open country AT3, the RT, the American version, we do. And yeah, you're right. The 2857516 is a big one. 2657516. In those patterns, we do have 16s and the mud tyre as well. So just not the new one. Okay. So you've got probably 3 choices in those sizes, just not the new open country RT from Japan. Yeah.
When you're talking about the 2-ply versus 3-ply,
yes,
light duty, heavy duty, is that really just its puncture resistance that you're talking about there? Through the main part of the carcass, or just a sidewall?
Sidewall. Okay. So on top of that carcass, all these tyres will have 2 steel belts, but they vary too in thickness. Okay. And not on cap ply. Some will have 1, some will have 2. Okay. So it's mainly the sidewall because that's the only bit that extends. The steel belts and the nylon are on the top, okay, on the tread section. The sidewall is the carcass only, which is what we're looking at there, okay? If we're getting a little bit more technical too.
Well, we also looked at one of your charts there and it said 8-ply.
Yes.
What's that 8-ply?
This is a really, awesome point. Okay, so the actual, now you'll hear a term when you're buying tyres, the ply rating, okay? And the number of plies, they're 2 different things. Okay, really important point. So all these tyres we looked at here, we can have, all these tyres are either 8 or 6 ply, but they've got 2 or 3 plies. So it's 2 different things. So just to give you now, a lot of the ratings and so on, I think in our industry, to be frank, are confusing. Okay. The ply rating is a very old school measure of casing strength, okay? And I'll tell you how old it is. It comes from before we had materials like polyester, okay? It was when they used to use cotton for carcass. That was the number of plies. Now it's not. It's based on the strength, okay? But yeah, so that's why that is 2 different things, okay? So just to give you an example in another type of tyre, like your truck tyres we see on semi-trailers and so on, most of them are 16-ply. They will have 1 physical ply of steel, okay? So it's to do with the casing strength, the ply rating. The number of plies is a different thing, okay? It is confusing, I agree.
And just one more question.
Yes.
My understanding is a lot of the temperature change in tyres comes from the sidewall flex.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
if you're running too low a deflation, the sidewall flex, air temperature heats up, and that's what will eventually destroy the tyres. That's right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. That's what generates the heat. So if we don't have enough pressure, we've got too much flex, too much heat. Yeah. Spot on. Absolutely correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Look, again, thanks very much. I know that, look, we're as a company, we're very happy with our association with the Toyota Land Cruise Club of Victoria. It's been really good. And again, thank you again for the invite. Thank you.